Because it's just broadcasting on my little test channel.
Hey, we're live.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you so much all for joining us today. This is Faith Over Breakfast. We are at Exo Coffee, and by we, I mean me, the host Brian Betts, and more importantly, Pastor Andy Littleton from Mission Church, and Pastor Eric Deepen from the Village.
He's not very loud.
I'm sorry. Okay, there you go.
I think we all gotta kiss the mic.
I think it's gonna be.
Is this your water?
I think it's
yes.
gonna be okay.
You sure?
Iced coffee is right there. I would have.
Oh, I don't want the iced coffee in the camera.
So, now this is real Faith Over Breakfast
Real
right here
Faith Over Breakfast.
for Andy's chewing on his XO Whiskey Town biscuit. But I'm just gonna say, I hate to say this, but you will never have this sandwich I'm having right now because some of the ingredients are out because they use fresh ingredients and they switched it all up. And I've got chorizo on my sandwich, and it's delicious. So, anyway, you're never gonna have a sandwich here, but it's delicious. And in general, what they do is delicious, and we're thankful we get to meet up here in the lot.
Yeah, and people can now see how awesome this background is. Like,
Yeah,
this is we need to convert this to our new church building down here.
right.
It's
Yeah,
pretty sweet down there.
yeah, we're live. We've some comments have been made. If you're an avid listener, you've heard comments especially from Brian about our viewers. And today, there's actually viewers, and there's the train, which means Brian, who I just mentioned, might have something to say.
A very important, profound thing to say.
But not.
And there goes the train.
Huh?
And a bunch. What?
Well,
I know. So every time.
just as good as always, Brian. Thank you.
I know. Really inspirational. I'm so bummed you missed it because of that very quiet train.
Did we say welcome to Faith Over Breakfast?
Yes, I did.
I'm
It was very brief. Oh no, it's all good. It was very, very brief,
Yeah.
and then we kind of jumped into talking about
We're
it.
totally not a normal podcast, because aren't you supposed to pause at like every 10 minutes and say, you're listening to Faith Over Breakfast?
Yeah, and you're-
blah,
and you're-
blah, 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 blah.
And you're supposed to repeat each other's names and stuff like that, and say, "Hey,
By the way, Andy Littleton,
yeah, hey,
pastor of
Eric
Mission Church.
Seepin, can you
Oh,
answer?"
we can't do that. We're changing the way podcasts are heard and listened to.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, the premise of this podcast, we haven't talked about that for a little bit, but the premise is Eric and I, we used to get breakfast before doing a radio show, and Brian kind of knows some of the people involved and all that, and so that's how he ended up kind of hanging out with us too. And we would have breakfast before the radio show, and it was a fun breakfast, and we'd have this great discussion, then we'd get on the radio and get to say about 5 minutes of whatever we talked about, and often we didn't say it as well, or it just wasn't as interesting.
I thought it was great every time.
Really?
Yeah, every time.
Well, never mind. It was great on the radio, but it was short, very short.
It was
Well,
brief.
it's very short.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then we kind of we were like, well, we kind of wanted to still do something, and so we thought, why don't we record the breakfast and just have the whole discussion? So this is authentic radio.
It is authentic radio.
There's actual breakfast,
yeah.
And I'm the only one that ever. No, sometimes Brian.
He already ate his breakfast.
Yeah,
he was
I
here
did.
early before all of us. 8 and
7:30. I got it at
7:30.
7:30.
Wow. And Brian's got his greasy shirt on because
Yeah.
he works all night.
Yeah, it's full. Well, not like grease from not showering, but I haven't showered today. But
So
that's
there's that
because I
too.
came straight from work, and I'm an aircraft mechanic, so I'm working with all sorts of stuff. But
Yeah, well, since we have like hundreds and hundreds of listeners now, there are so many, we know that we'll just put in a quick plug and then we can move on to on November 2nd to 4th. There's a discipleship conference at the Village. You can go to the website, villageconference2017.com. That's 2017. If you want to know more about it, listen to the previous podcasts. But tonight, I'm used to saying tonight because I preach at night
Yeah,
all the
me too.
time. It's
Yeah.
so weird to preach in the morning and you're like, and tonight, I mean today. Anyway,
Yeah.
we're going to talk about fatherhood, right?
Yeah.
so we'll go and start with this. Recently, Pastor Andy Littleton from the Mission Church, his father was diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah. Yeah, so we went in for a surgery. I wouldn't call it a routine surgery because it was unplanned, but my dad had to go in for a surgery last week. And but it seemed they did the scans and it all made sense. Like, okay, this is gonna help. And about 45 minutes later, we got word that they found cancer in there, pretty pervasive cancer. And all of a sudden, the timeline was unsure. Like maybe maybe he only has days to live. I started thinking about what if I just had my last conversation with my dad, that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it's been a really emotional week. Really, really surprising to me, really confusing. I'm kind of I don't know how much I shared back on my Andy's Issues podcast, but I've got a weird relationship with emotion. I really struggle to like feel the depths of things, and this week has not been that way at all, which is good, but has also been really, really confusing and really like a roller coaster. Just thinking about losing my dad, and current status is he's actually maybe it's a little bit more treatable than we thought. It's an incurable cancer. His life will be shorter, but maybe not as short as we originally thought. So I'm feeling encouraged seeing him recover from surgery and thinking we get some more time together. It looks like it's never guaranteed, of course, but just he's been on my mind this week, and there's been a whole flood of things. But my dad's he's a sweet guy. He's a real flawed guy.
What guy?
Flawed.
Very flawed. I thought you said flogged guy. And I'm like, what's a flogged guy? That's a new one.
He might have been flogged, actually. He had a rough upbringing. That's a whole other piece of the puzzle. But yeah, he's got he's got his strengths and his weaknesses. And so I thought today, I've just been thinking about how my dad shaped me, and I guess I've been a little more aware of some of that stuff. Even little things that, like, the nurses have come in the hospital room and gone, oh, you two look alike, like to my dad and I, and going, yeah, that's true, huh? And then I know Eric, when I think, I know your father, and that's a big piece of your journey is your dad, right?
Sure.
As it is with the reason this is worth talking about on a podcast is because how many of us, if not all of us, are shaped by our father, or the fact that we don't know the father that that who is our father, and or something to do with our story with our dad, and just how much that impacts us. So I thought, why don't we talk about that? And Eric, you and I, and Brian, we can share from our experiences and see what lands with people out there, because I'm sure there's a lot of stories and a lot of nuance, but sometimes one person's story kind of, I don't know, wakes you up to something or helps you see something or
sure,
whatever. But anyway, that's what's going on with my dad now. How your dad's been going through a lot.
Yeah, my dad's in Tennessee.
Yeah.
My parents just up and bought a house in Tennessee and moved there. They still have their house here.
Yeah.
But my youngest brother lives out there, and his youngest son, Andrew, has a whole bunch of health issues. Right now is in the hospital, and right now he's going to be on a feeding tube for a long time, and they're teaching my brother and wife how to feed their child and take care of him and be able to take him home with all that. And so my parents have gone out there to support them because they have 3 others, right?
And your parents, your whole family, there's been some devastating loss.
Yeah, both my brothers have lost their younger children.
Yeah.
So that's been really hard on our family.
Yeah.
And death's just it's one of those things where you have to go on in life, and live with the living, but then the dead, especially when they're young, are just, there's an ache there. I mean, death itself it's just a horrific thing. But yeah, so it's been hard on my father, and my mom and dad are in their mid-70s. They act like they're in their mid-40s, but so that keeps them alive. I mean, I think that keeps them vibrant and moving.
Yeah, my dad's 73. For my age, my parents are older for considering my age. Right. My mom's 78.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So it's been interesting. It's kind of been on my mind a little bit lately that, hey, these two are, we don't know the timeline with my parents, and I'm aware that can happen to anybody. A buddy of mine that lives on our property, he lost his mom at a younger age and to cancer. And so, but there's like the norm is like, you're going to be usually like, I don't know. I've just noticed a lot of people in their 40s, 50s start losing their parents. I'm in my 30s, and going, oh, it's on the horizon.
Right, it's a little different for you because of them being older.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know. I want to talk about, just the ways that, I guess a bit of a journey with our dads. Like how do you see the way they've shaped us, and then the ways we've struggled with them, and just talk about that a little. Brian, why don't you? Why don't you pitch in a little of your 2 cents on that?
In terms about my father, or just questions?
Your dad.
My dad is in his early mid 50s, 53, and he is probably my favorite person walking. In a lot of ways, I'm very different from him, but I have a lot of his sins. So I love my dad and love who he is, but whenever I make a mistake that he has made or things like that, I really want to I don't push him away, but I'm just like, no, that's not me. So I'm quicker to. There's so many ways that I want to be him and have those characteristics that he has that I don't, and there's a lot of things that similarities where we line up. So I'm like, no. I was always the novelty child. I was always very, very different. So. A lot of ways I wanted to be very, very different from my family. And I already was, but I just wanted to be completely different from them. But
how'd you try to do that?
A lot of it was very, it wasn't, I didn't really have to try that much just because I was the only one that was outgoing. My mom was pretty outgoing, but she's also very studious and very, very. She's a funny person, but she is very professional as well. So our approach to interacting with people are very, very different. And my dad is very, very personable, but he's more introverted. And my younger brother and my older brother, they're both very introverted. It was no problem for me to interact with people. My younger brother, my older brother usually kept me from interacting with them, with their friends, because I would just be rambunctious. And my dad wasn't rambunctious at all, but we shared a lot of the same sins. But I wanted to ask...
It's kind of weird to talk about all this on a podcast, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And I don't want it to be too much about me, especially if, hypothetically, we might talk about me next week.
Don't worry about it, man.
Yeah, so...
I think we're not really planning anything. So
okay,
we're going to go with it.
I'm totally okay with that. So I wanted to ask, what do your parents do for a living?
Well, both my parents are retired and not retired at all. They're marriage and family counselors, trainers of leaders in churches. They run their own organization. They have their own business. My father was a math teacher before. That's what my parents do.
And my parents are similar but opposite. They are both retired and very much both retired. They're... but my mom, early on, she had a teaching degree, and she taught stuff like shorthand and typing.
Old school stuff.
Yeah. So as a high schooler, pecking around on my computer with my fingers, trying to learn how to type, she would always just be struggling not to type my papers for me because she wanted to teach me the right way to do it, and nobody at school was doing that. I don't know. What do you think of that, Brian? The train's coming by.
It was
He
right
doesn't,
from.
he doesn't know what shorthand is.
Yeah, he's like I don't know what you're talking about.
Shorthand?
Yeah.
Go ahead and explain, because I think I might know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'd have to show. I actually have a picture of. I tried some different sermon notes on a completely different topic right now. A couple weeks ago, because I saw Tim Keller's sermon notes for 1 week that were all on one page, and that involved a lot of shorthand, a lot of shortened words and characters used that mean things that like when with is a W with a slash.
Yes.
Right.
Like that's.
These are shorthand.
There's a whole method of shorthand by which you can take notes and write very quickly.
Okay.
And my mom is like an expert in that, and she used to teach it. College level. Well, she taught typing. I don't remember which level she taught what at.
What does your dad do? What did he do?
Well, and then, so real quick, my mom then started a bookstore in a small town, in which a slightly younger gentleman with a beard and a 4x4 truck started popping in, looking for the book "Walk Across America" by Peter Jenkins. He would look for it a lot, and her business partner at the bookstore suggested she thought maybe he was looking more for my mom than the book. And so my mom asked my dad out because she figured out what he was attempting to do. So anyway, my dad's always been a real low-key guy. He actually was really emotionally, verbally abused as a child. Just a really low sense of self, and confidence is just not strong for him. But he started working in lumber like right as soon as he could get a job, and then we moved to Arizona. We lived in Oregon, and then moved to Arizona. He got on real low paying jobs because there's no lumber around here, and went back to school in his 50s to kind of get a technical degree, and ended up in an alloy shop making wire, working with platinum. And then, because of his age, and he was slowing down a little bit, he ended up, they gave him the janitor position, partly because he was working nights, like in his 60s, and they gave him the janitor position so he could be on days. So he ended as a janitor. So there you go. And then my mom ended her career in working in a library here in Tucson, CDO, Canyon Del Oro High School Library.
So did your parents' jobs and professions and what they were doing make a huge impact on why, or is that why you decided to pursue ministry?
Well, yeah. I mean, my entire life is kind of circles my parents in a lot of ways. So when I was young, my parents were involved in the Navigators. So the early years of my life, my mom and dad, particularly my dad, but my mom too, they worked with the military and they worked down on campus. But my dad was a math teacher, and so he got an opportunity to be a principal or a vice principal in Miami, Arizona.
Arizona, little mining town.
It's a little mining town on your way to Roosevelt Lake.
Yeah.
It's actually called the armpit of Arizona.
I love Globe, by the way, which is right by Miami.
Yeah,
it's one of my favorite little towns.
They're neither. You can't really tell the difference between the two.
Yeah. They kind of blend.
They do. They just merge into each other. So yeah, my dad. But even there, my parents were heavily involved in ministry. My dad started a church in Globe or in Miami.
I did not know
And
that.
at that point, the issues that were going on in that church, he said, I got to figure out how to help people. And so he changed careers, and we moved to Indiana, and he went and got his master's in counseling from Dr. Larry Crabb and Dan Allender, and at Grace Theological Seminary. And my mom did that too. From there, we moved to North Carolina, where he took a position at a church that didn't go very well. And so
it was like pastoral.
It was a pastoral job.
Didn't know that.
And then we, right before my 9th grade year, moved all the way back to Tucson, into the apartments that I was born in. And my parents restarted. My dad had got a math teaching job. They were trying to figure out how to start this counseling thing.
Yeah.
They finally got that off the ground, and my dad started a Biblical Counseling Associates, which is the longest standing counseling group, I don't know what you call them,
Yeah.
association in Tucson.
Wow.
He's outlasted everybody.
That's crazy.
And so he's been here a long time, so people know me. And so when I was in high school, and we were talking 2 weeks ago about the Christian concerts, I go to Christian concerts, and people would come up to me and be like, "Oh, I was at your house and I saw your picture in the hallway." Because my parents did a lot of the counseling.
Yeah.
They had offices in our house.
We just had a guy come up here to the loft where we
Right.
podcast, who's down in the restaurant, and he was like, "What's your name, Eric?" "Oh, I know your parents from the counseling."
Yeah. So I get that. Or one time I was sitting at a mechanic's, and he's like, "Oh, Eric Siepen, you're John Siepen's son?" Yeah. And he's like, "Oh, he saved my marriage."
Yeah.
Like, and as a freshman in college or whatever it is, you're like, "Oh, okay, that's so nice."
Uh-huh.
So it's kind of exposing in some ways to be known everywhere in town. But my father, like my family, like some of the good things and the bad things, but one of the things my father taught and really expressed was family loyalty. So loyalty is a huge thing that he handed off. And it has its good things, and that I'm very loyal to people. And it's really hard to get rid of me. The other side is that I demand it at a high level from other people, and I'm super hurt if people don't follow through. And I see that with my father, too, when he has poured his life into people, and there's just all this pain when they eventually say, well, we don't want what you have to offer, or you're not acceptable, or you've hurt me too much to really be in relationship with you. And so there's a lot of pain in that, and I've experienced that too, and it's kind of a legacy. But I think also, and this is where your father and my father are similar, is that they're veterans. Right? My dad spent 4 years or 3 years in Vietnam.
And my dad was drafted in the Vietnam War. Did not see combat, but he was a tank operator stationed in Germany, just waiting to go in. But he was drafted.
My dad did one of those things where he was drafted, but then opted to volunteer, so he could choose what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that all worked.
I don't either.
Especially during the draft and Vietnam War and all that kind of stuff. But anyway,
I've been watching the Ken Burns Vietnam documentary.
I'm looking forward to seeing it. I haven't had a chance to sit down.
I've seen pieces, and it's online now, and so I want to kind of go back and just watch the whole thing, because with our churches being in the evening, a lot of them would show Sunday evenings and stuff like that.
Right.
But that's made me think. I've thought a lot about your dad, because actually, your dad has done a lot of counseling in my life.
Yeah.
And so, in those moments, every once in a while he'll mention something about Vietnam, and I've wondered how did this shape John? And then my dad, he a little different. He wasn't in Vietnam, so it's interesting just to think about the different ways that definitely changed his life. My dad grew up in Bisbee, so little Arizona mining towns.
Right, probably the other underarm. Well, Bisbee's actually a little bit nicer than
Bisbee's. I love Bisbee.
Maybe it's the face.
Arizona. Well, it once was. It was once the place to be in Arizona.
Yeah, it's true.
And I would retire there. I guess myself, I would do it. But anyway, he had this small town upbringing. His dad worked on the railroads. He ended up in Oregon, but then I'm sure being drafted in the military and then coming back, that was pretty big deal. Like, changed my dad's life, So, but for your dad, he saw combat.
He never actually fired bullets at people. He was a signal officer, so he radioed in, missile attacks and artillery things. But he had, the base was hit a lot. And, they had to bunker down. And there were a couple times when they had to load up with all the guns and drive into hostile territory. And but he didn't have to experience that. Which is good, because it's a whole nother level of PTSD when you have to fire a weapon at someone and they fire back at you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And watch people die. It's different. It impacts you.
Yeah. So both our dads had military experience, but they didn't
see combat
per se. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. What are the things, like, when you? I know there's. Your ministry has all of these counseling elements. Like, there's so much, more of that to your ministry than there are in the typical church.
Yes.
Like, and it's not just what you do; it's your church is like based on
Sure.
this, So there's that. I mean, but kind of when you just sit back sometimes, and there's a few things that you think like, man, like that's my dad in me. What are a few of those?
Well, I mean, I think my dad is a risk taker, and I did, and I've realized more as I've gotten older that he was a risk taker. He takes lots of risks,
Yeah.
and I see that in myself. Like I'm willing to jump in and do stuff, and I think he also created in me a willingness to fail and get back up and do it again. But I don't know if this really answers your question, but the thing that I sit back and think is my dad was not a Christian when he was in Vietnam, and he became a Christian shortly after he came back. And to know that there was some Catholic, which I believe are Christian, but there's some Catholic legacy, but not devout Catholic in his life. But he's really, there's a lot of darkness in his past. And so like he made a stand and entered into the kingdom of God. And so one of the things that when I sit back and I look at the village, and the things that I've done, is I just think of those as an extension of what my father and mother decided to do in turning their backs on the world in some way, on the enemy and choosing Jesus. So that's their legacy as much as my legacy. And I think that's a powerful thing. I think sometimes when my father is, I've had to have a lot of grace on him because, he was a first generation Christian. He had no clue what to do in raising children. And I was talking to an older guy who's about my dad's age about 5 years ago, and he's like, we had one book. And most of us hadn't read it. Like there wasn't, the Christian world didn't have a lot of parenting books, in the 70s that were worth anything or anyone was writing. And the world, Dr. Spock was all we had, or whatever his name was. There wasn't a lot there. You just did it. You just smacked your kid around and told him, or you just left him alone. You didn't know what to do with him. So.
Yeah, that's one of the things that amazes me the most about my parents in general, and my dad in particular. I mean, like my mom, her family came west in the Dust Bowl, lost everything. Her dad was a cowboy who then had to figure things out. But I mean, these people weren't reading parenting books and going to nice little church parenting seminars. They're it's like base survival stuff. And then my dad's dad was one of the World War vets, and we couldn't find his family tree. My mom's big into family trees, and she could not figure out my dad's dad. And they ended up figuring out, what they figured out is that he changed his name.
Oh, wow.
So, he's in Bisbee with a kind of a false identity, and my grandma knew nothing about his past. He wouldn't talk about it, wouldn't speak about it. So what does that mean? I have no idea. Was it just, was he hurt, abused, disassociating from his family? Did something really wrong? Something happened in one of the wars? I have no idea, But here's a guy, my dad's dad, who detached, substance issues, damaged man, just, and so my dad he lived with that. He was wandering all over the deserts of southern Arizona without a father kind of leading him and guiding him, and then he got home and got called stupid and just ripped to shreds emotionally by this guy. And even when I was growing up, I would watch my dad attempt to have conversations with his dad, which to me is that's how brave is that to try to go back to this man who treated you this way and attempt to talk to him. And, so my dad, Christianity was there. His mom's family had started the Lutheran church in Bisbee, Arizona. They were German, so you were Lutheran, and that's what it was. And so he grew up with that, and his mom was pretty sweet. But at the same time, he wasn't given this, he was never talked about discipled, nothing, nothing at all. And so he though he didn't come to Christ necessarily later, he had to figure out everything for the first time.
Right.
I feel like with faith and parenting and all that stuff. So I look at him and his flaws and all that, but I'm just like, I'm so proud of you for how much you did, like how far you moved, how willing to follow Jesus you were. This is all uncharted territory, and like your family didn't give it to you. No, nobody was telling you to do it. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's interesting about all this and talking about fathers is we're fathers.
Yep.
Your daughter's sitting behind us.
She's reading a Nancy Drew mystery about 10 feet away.
Yep. And and I have a daughter and a son.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing about it all is you really want to be a good father.
Oh, gosh.
Right? You really want to be a good father. But the fact is, you're not.
No.
And you're actually not the father of your children.
Right.
God is the father of your children, and you're just on loan.
Yeah.
And I think my father really felt the burden of getting it right, supporting his family, providing for them, tried really hard, didn't know what to do. Whereas I feel like the legacy of being able to grow up in the Christian community and have the things that he's introduced me to, I understand theologically and practically a little different what fatherhood is, and that I can be vulnerable with my kids. I can allow them in a different way. I mean, I'm not perfect. I'm by no means in that, even in that process of being vulnerable. But I do understand that, like, I am a reflection of God, but I don't have to do that perfectly. I can allow them to help shape me in that and communicate that to them. So I think the legacy my father gave me was an introduction to that. Like, he opened the doors that he would never, ever be able to go through. And I think that's a pretty powerful,
it's amazing,
legacy to offer. So.
And it's interesting on my end because there's no ministry. There's no. So here I've started up a business. I'm a pastor. That's not. You're going like I'm continuing my parents' ministry. It's like, for me, it's not really that at all. Well, but not at all. It's interesting because our church and some of the people I connect with deeply, I've noticed, are very like my parents. And I've thought about the, just my experiences and what God's purposes and all that might be. But we've got guys that are houseless, living downtown at our church. We've got blue collar folks. We've got some educated folks. We've got a whole mix of people. And I think about, I had my mother had a master's degree. My dad, barely scraped through high school and, was a manual labor, guy. My mom was a business owner at one point. It's like, I've always felt like I lived between two worlds. Like even within my home, we had educated conversation, but then I would watch my dad interact with guys. He worked in a lumber yard here forever, and he had a buddy in the lumber yard who was somewhat, mentally handicapped, but he was always. I would watch the way he kind of joke with them and keep the guy at ease, and he was his friend, he was his buddy. And I've noticed, like within our church, like I do that toward folks like this guy that my dad did that with. That I don't know. It's weird. I know a language. I know a way of operating. I took one of my old students that I used to work with in student ministry to a trailer park to visit someone, and I grew up in a trailer park, and I just asked him. I said, "Do you feel comfortable here?" And he's like, "No, I feel really uncomfortable." And he looked at me. He said, "Do you feel comfortable here?" And I was like, "Absolutely, 100%. I feel like I could go up to any door and strike up a conversation." But I feel that way in a business meeting too. Like, so it's this unique like ability to bridge gaps that I think like happened in my home, and my dad like really shaped me and taught me how to function within, among the poor, and because I wouldn't call him like they haven't always had a lot of money. Right now, I wouldn't refer to them as poor, but he knows how to love and treat folks who are. Yeah. And he's always been really, really good at it, really disarming. And he's very quiet and very introverted in a way, but But in those situations, you see him kind of come alive, and people just love him. And so, I don't know. I think about, though they didn't start ministries or anything, but
Sure.
but they ministered in their own unique ways, and
Well, it certainly taught you a lot of skills
taught me a lot of skills.
inside of your family.
Oh yeah, it absolutely shapes our church, shapes my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
It is. That is really interesting. Man, I think, the thing about being a father, regardless if you're a father or follows Jesus or not, you end up shaping so... It's just you tell people who God is.
Yeah.
And it's the thing that God has decided the way He decided to reveal Himself is through faulty fathers.
Yeah.
And so, I think in my journey of trying to negotiate that, and I think one of the big things on the negative end, since, I really loved my dad and could talk about all the cool things about him, but, the hard part for me is that my relationship with my dad, there was an element of acceptance was built on doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times when things aren't going the way they're supposed to go, one of the things that I believe is that God is upset because I haven't done the right thing. That there's blessing is missing because I haven't been obedient.
Yeah.
And I have screwed up. And so the relationship with God becomes a very one of exchange. It just becomes if I do the right thing and He gives me good things, and then it's just kind of a candy relationship where, and not an actual one. It's I'm blanking on the word, but
You know what you mean.
Yeah, and I think that in my community, a lot of I think in this world, because there's been such an absence of fathers, especially in our culture, involved fathers.
Yeah.
A lot of work has to be done in undoing that, and understanding, the fallibility of our own fathers and trying to see where they shine through to offer God and where they just completely, they don't represent God.
Yeah.
And we can't allow them to represent God. We have to say, no, you don't represent God.
Yeah.
Even though
you're not the whole picture.
Right. And I think that's a hard thing, because you have these immediate things where absence of dad over presence, whatever it is, it defines God for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I see things that, one thing about my dad is his dad was abusive. My dad came around and was very gentle, and I never ever doubted that he loved me, and there are things like that I'm so grateful for. Like, even, there were times when it's kind of the flip side of what you're saying, because there were times when I did something absolutely wrong. A really funny one to me now is I brought home a super raunchy movie about living in the hood. and I was really obsessed with, as a kid, it had some, I don't know, like racial identity questions or whatever. And I was like big in like the hood and, stuff like that. So I brought home this movie about living in the hood.
Do you remember the name of the movie?
I do, yeah.
You don't want to share that name with us?
No, yeah. How to be menace to South Central while drinking your juice in the hood, or that one. Have you seen that movie?
No,
Wow. Don't be a menace to South Central while drinking your juice in the hood, which is like a spoof on hood movies that just gets super raunchy and super inappropriate.
Right.
So I bring this movie home from Bookman's, and my dad looks at it, kind of looks at the cover, and he goes, and he goes, "You know what, son? I think we better watch this one together." And I was like, what? And so we sit in the living room of our little mobile home, our little 19-inch TV or whatever. We're watching this movie, and I am just crawling and I'm like, every once in a while I laugh at a joke, and I look over at him, and he's just got his kind of hand on his chin, just kind of going, And the movie ends, and he looks over at me, and he says, "Well, I think we probably better return this one. What do you think?" And I said, yeah, okay. He goes, "All right, well, let's go." And we just kind of quietly went down to Bookman's and returned it and said thank you, and he kind of pats me on the back and goes, "Okay, let's go." And so in the midst of that, like, I felt conviction. I felt all these things, but I never felt unsafe with Dad. Like, even looking back on it, I go, man, he loved me. I was accepted. He exposed me in a very gentle way, you know.
That's awesome.
So
that's like a sweet story. I'm hoping you've used that in a sermon.
I think I've used it once. Yeah, and it'll come back. Yeah,
that one will, as Rod says, will preach.
That one will preach. Yeah, and I mentioned something even this past Sunday that, you know, my dad, like my parents, you know, their discipline mode at first was belts and spoons. And my dad would be the one who would bring the belt, but there was never a moment, you know. And when I look back, like, I never doubted that he loved me very much, and like I would want to be with him, you know, moments later. Like like he would discipline me with a belt, a leather belt, and ouch, you know, right? But I never thought he didn't love me. And so I mentioned that in church, like, how do you do that? That's incredible. To discipline someone, bring pain, but that they would have full knowledge of love and acceptance. I mean, that's what I hear in the Bible about God, and my dad did a great job with that. You know, he never gave the sense that it was me he was angry with, but that he needed to discipline me so I would change and learn.
That's awesome.
So those things were incredible. But then, you know, conflict, he wasn't good with that. He would complain instead of engage and do something about things. And I see that stuff in myself. You know, I see myself when things aren't going my way, I get kind of gripey at other people. And then I see, like, when really hard things are coming my way, like, that's one of my biggest sins, is to kind of try to just let it work itself out. You know, like, let's see it'll work itself out. And that's probably a direct quote of my father at some point in my life, because it's so ingrained in me. Like, and I remember, you know, conflict in our home where my dad would be sitting there with a magazine reading, and my mom and I are arguing, and he's just, there he is in the chair. And it's like, where you at? And I see myself, like, I'm not just in that rut, but it's way harder for me to enter in and engage and speak with clarity and strength, because my go-to is just go away. Yeah. You know.
Well, that's interesting in the last part you were saying. And I think that's very similar with my father when it comes to the arguments with Mom. Like, he just, I don't have any memories of him really entering in or offering his opinion. So if it was a theological conversation that was heated, he wouldn't enter in. If it was like I want to do this and I can't do this and I whatever, he wouldn't enter in. So I never really knew what my dad thought until later in life about those things. Mom had the power in that in that area. So I think it's interesting.
Yeah, my dad, one time that I remember, and my mom and I remember it vividly, that she and I were in an argument, and he stood up, and he, one of the few expletives I've ever heard come out of his mouth in this moment, so I won't share that, but he just, it was like something finally, you know, snapped, and my mom just plopped down in her chair and got quiet. We were both just like, what? You know, and he was just like, sit down, we're done, you know, and we were, but in a weird way, we were both like, thank you.
Thanks for organizing
like, we needed
our
that.
chaos.
So
that's interesting.
but virtually, I didn't really know. And later in life, I took my dad on a hike in the Chiricahua Mountains. He had mentioned something about my mom. He and my mom drove there, and he didn't really get to walk around. And so I told Michaela, my wife, a couple years ago, I was like, I think my dad's slowing down. I think I might need to do this. I think I need to take him there. And we did. We took our little camper and went there, and he barely made the whole hike. I'm so glad we did it, because he could not do it now. He couldn't have done it this year. But on that hike, I made it one of my goals was I'm going to learn more about him. And you have to ask like 10 questions, you know, to get there, which for me is a struggle. But it was cool to like kind of mine my dad and find out what was behind some of his thinking. And it took work, but it was there, and that was good. I'm really glad.
That sounds like a really cool trip.
It was really good. Yeah. really. We forgot blankets, being typical, idiot men, and so it was really cold, and
You didn't do any snuggling?
it was close. And then my dad seemed to be asleep, and I moved over to the car and turned the heater on to try to warm up, and then I moved, set the car alarm off, woke us and the whole campsite up. There were a lot of foibles. It was funny, but no, it was a really meaningful time. But similarly, I just didn't. It's not just that I found out later; I had to dig for it later. But he didn't offer a lot of that.
Right. That's going to be your significant story. I think the thing that I love about my dad is there are moments as I've gotten older that I just think, wow, those were incredible. We started early out in our ministry. Before I planted the village, I did the whole college and singles thing, and we had this young woman who had a mental breakdown, and she was in her apartment, and actually she was in a friend's apartment, and she refused to leave, and she was not coherent. And so I get there, and my wife and I get there, and we're trying to talk her out because we want to get her to the hospital. We don't want to call 911 yet. I call my dad because it's an hour and we can't get her out. He comes walking in. He walks straight into the door. He walks right up to her, and he's like, hey, and he says her name. He says, you want to go get a Jamba Juice? And she's like, sure. And she hops up and walks out with him. He takes her to get a Jamba Juice and takes her to the hospital. And I'm just staring. My wife and I are just like, what just happened? But he had that, just that gravitas. He walked in and... all of a sudden he's in command and he's in charge, and everybody knew it, and everybody's like, oh, okay, we don't have to be tense anymore and worry about this. He's got it. John's here, and my dad's always had that element in crisis. When there's no crisis or there's crisis in his own family, that's not there. but when there's crisis, my dad is the man you want to have with you. So I love those stories. They inspire me. I'm like, okay, that's what I want to be. I want to be that, So
that plus a little something. And I always figured, I think it was on that Chiricahua walk. I was really digging into my dad. What were some of your goals and hopes? And one of the big ones is he said something to the effect. He said, "Well, I wanted to do a better job." And I think he was especially talking about being a father and a husband. I wanted to do a better job. And so I look at all of his shortcomings and flaws, but when I look at what he was given, it's he did a way better job. I mean, there's a C.S. Lewis thing on being a Christian. He was kind of talking about it was essentially, I don't remember the quote at all, but it was essentially, you could have somebody who had been given all the answers and knew all the stuff, and God had required something of them, and they really didn't change much, but they knew all the answers, and they were faithful in church, and they gave their money. And then there's the drunk who God just asked for one move, just to trust Him and to trust Him over alcohol, and they stumble forward and sometimes do it and sometimes they don't, and they struggle, And Lewis kind of said, so which one followed Jesus, right? Is it the stumbling drunk who's every once in a while back at it, or the one who didn't really do anything but went to church and paid the tithe and all that stuff? And when I think of my dad, I'm like, man, he changed he went so much further. He gave so much. He trusted so much more than his father. He really did. And that to me is a huge sign of the work of God in his life. And so then I think about, my life. And since he said that to me, I've thought okay, I don't need the perfect dad. He made significant moves. And if I can build on that somewhat, do a little more, and then, I'd be thrilled if Abby, someday went, okay, my dad he was all right. He did, appreciate some things he did. He had some real flaws. I'd like to, in my family, just do a little more, give a little more to our kids. I mean, that'd be a beautiful thing. So,
I'm thinking our time is close to being up, Brian.
Yeah, it's awful close.
Yeah.
What do you think, hearing all this, if you had a couple minutes to
wrap us up?
Wrap us up and...
Well, I wanted to kind of ask something that, or just want to, I don't want it to be like a defining thing to where it's like an ultimatum or anything, but I want to ask, what's one really important thing that your father taught you that you hope that your kid grasps? And I know you both kind of went into different things relating to that, but maybe something that hadn't been mentioned yet. Or if you want to elaborate on something you previously mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, one thing with my dad, maybe I could sum it up with like saying just quiet faithfulness. There are a lot of elements of that. There's little stuff like we didn't have devotion time or family devotions in our home. But what I would do is I would come home and see my dad sitting there reading the Word, reading Scripture. So he didn't do it to be the awesome dad or the awesome spiritual leader, but he actually was. He would go there with Jesus himself from time to time, right? And that almost meant more than the dads who were like, I've seen a whole lot of super dads who make it a big point to display to their family how great they're doing spiritually. And it actually means more to me when I look at somebody like my dad who you catch with God. You catch him with God. You go, oh, that's what he does when I'm gone, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then there's a little example of him at work where he found a bar of platinum that had probably been snuck out of the building.
Bar of platinum.
Which is...
Wow.
Yes. Lots of money. And so I had assumed, when he first told me about it when I was younger, that somebody accidentally took it out. I think somebody... Kind of the more I asked him about it, probably somebody snuck it out. And he went and he got it and he returned it. And I don't think he told anybody. I don't think he ratted out anybody. He didn't say like, that guy did it, take him down, mess up his life. He just quietly made it right. And I would venture to say that outside of, the only reason I know is because he got a $25 gift card from work and we asked what that was for.
He returned the platinum and got a $25 gift card.
Yep. Which, in a way, is where some of my dad's pain and I understand is like, in many ways, that is his life. Getting very little compensation for very meaningful things, right?
Yeah.
And I still understand that pain.
Yeah.
But yeah, probably very few people know about it other than my mom, myself, the boss, and somebody, and there's probably somebody out there who should have been arrested who wasn't, because my dad also didn't try to destroy them. He made it right, but he didn't try to destroy them. And I think about that in light of stuff like what's going on with like the restaurant Cup It Up here in Tucson, where somebody, you don't like them, so they do something you perceive as wrong, which maybe was wrong or whatever, and you decide to destroy them. Well, my dad, he dealt with things, but not with a vision to destroy, but a desire to restore. But he didn't ever advertise that. He just did it quietly. And I really respect that. I want to be like that. I want Abby to be like that. People of our church to be like that.
That's a powerful story. I think that the one thing growing up, because my dad, like I said, was not always in the arguments and the heated things. I always thought that this thing about loving other people and really pouring your life out for other people was my mother's thing.
Yeah.
And as I've grown older and wiser and watched the dynamics of my family, I realized that the only reason that my mom deeply loves people, I mean, there are other reasons, but one of the main reasons is because she met my dad, and my dad loves people.
Yeah.
And he pours his life out for people. And I think, if anything, that's what I want my children to hold on to. That the greatest commandment my dad takes seriously, to love God and to love others as self. And like he really, he'll even confess that he doesn't do that well, but that's his mission in life. Yeah. And what he builds is not necessarily something he's that interested in as a legacy. He's more interested in how he cares for people and the way that they are healed and meet Jesus. So, and find what they need. So I want that to be for my kids. And as you said, for my church and for the people around me.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you both for sharing. It's been really great to hear how your fathers and your mothers as well have played a huge part in your lives. And thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that with me. This has been Faith Over Breakfast. I am with Pastor Andy Littleton and Pastor Eric Siepen at XO Coffee, and it's been great to...
Before we pause, keep going. Go on.
Let me my finger was going.
He was about to pause it, and I want to say something after you close this out.
But yeah, it was fantastic. A reminder to the conference?
No. Actually, because you guys have made the observation that I put all these weird things musically on our podcast, I just want to say that I am going to end this podcast with a song that my little brother wrote about my dad. Okay. So just want to put that in there so people know that it's coming.
Well, thank you for listening, and keep listening for that. That's going to be great. Bye.
Father, I woke up out of a dream, you had to leave. Had no time to grieve. I quickly began to retrieve all these memories. Didn't want to forget the way you used to smile at me. How when I was a child you would teach me. Did all you knew to reach me. Keep my heart beating with a dream. All these years later I realize I still cling to those talks. Driving around the city in circles, hole in the wall, deadbeat pizza joints, coffee shops, late night post office drops. All those nights of stories of the glories of days past. The many books you gave me to read, how you taught me about God, gave me the first Bible, taught me how to love the underdog, taught me compassion for the downtrodden, still loved me when I was fallen. I have to say I never knew the good thing I had, never left, stayed by my mother, could've run the other way, showed me faithfulness, it's in short supply these days, so I have to say truly grateful. Father, I don't know if I ever said that I was thankful. Father, even when you leave, even when you're gone, I won't forget you. I carry you with me. You show me the better way. Tie my eyes to see the far beyond. I'm standing on your shoulders, and I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. No, I'm not afraid. One thing I can't deny, I am my father's son. Funny how I used to hide this, it was just my pride. Took me a while to appreciate what you did until I stared into the eyes of my own kid. Used to be so hard on you, raised the standard in the bar way too high on you. Now this distance has caused me to clearly understand it was you that taught me how to be a man. Guess I had to grow up first and take a few knockdowns and a second glance. Father, now I've got a second chance to do what you never could do. I'm on the second story of the house you built, so I thank you. I'm saying thank you.